Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good wherever you are. I'm your host, That Lit Astro Chick, the channel where we discuss the natal charts of writers, artists, and anything else that I find interesting. So while I'm waiting for my evening melatonin to hit, I thought that it would be a good idea to jump back into doing a natal chart because I realized I haven't done one specifically on an author for a while. I know that I had promised that I was going to do a bunch of natal charts of poets, but then last month ended up being a little bit of a weird month, and I still have their natal chart saved. So while everybody else in the astro world is discussing the boys are fighting, the whole thing with Kendrick Lamar and Drake, I figured that should be enough time for me to go back and actually talk about the people who I care about, which are writers. And for tonight's natal chart, I wanted to discuss the author Voung. I had a chance to meet him before he got really, really famous. He did a couple of poems at my graduate studies program for their Writers Week. I can't remember what it's called, but he is a very nice, kind, sensitive man. He is everything I wish I could be. So I thought that it would be fun to just go ahead and analyze his chart, maybe for about 10 minutes, see where I'm at with this. So Voung, I'm just going to read briefly from the Wikipedia page. He was born originally in Vietnam, back in the days when it was known as being Saigon. His grandmother separated his mother and aunts into orphanages for their survival, and they fled Vietnam after police came to suspect that his mother was of mixed race, leaving her prone to discrimination. And then he resettled in the United States in Hartford, Connecticut, along with 6 of his relatives. He has always suspected, and this is actually where I'm going to get into this, is that dyslexia runs in his family. Was the first in his family to read at the age of 11. At 15 years old, Voung worked on a tobacco farm illegally and would later describe his experiences on the farm in On Earth We Are Briefly Gorgeous. And I do have that work as well as Night Sky with Exit Wounds, and he was very nice to sign both of those for me. So let's get to his chart. Voung was born on October 14th, 1988 in Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam, formerly known as Saigon. I don't have the birth time, so I just went ahead and I used a placeholder. Now, I did want to stick a pin in what he said about his family not being able to read and how he was the first in his family to learn how to read. And the reason for that is because his Chiron is in Cancer at that 7th degree. Now, I've always referred to Chiron as being the who hurt you asteroid because it's going to typically refer to areas in which we have been wounded and areas in which we will go forth to repair those wounds. So with his Chiron in Cancer, that means that there has most likely been a lot of discourse specifically around his ancestors as well as his heritage. And at that 7th degree, it's going to represent Neptunian energy, which is, of course, a very creative energy, but it's also going to be a creative energy that's marred by tragedy. In fact, if we're going to talk about the 7th degree and what Neptune represents, if you have Mercury, for example, if that is in Pisces, that can represent in someone's chart a potential learning disability because Mercury is at its detriment when it is in Pisces. So I would actually say I think that he is correct about this. And I don't think that it's something that his family most likely has talked a lot about. And I say that because he does have his Neptune in opposition of that Chiron in Cancer. So this most likely could refer to something that could be very hidden. It is almost exact because that Neptune is at that 7th degree of Capricorn. So this could represent something that may have been cached or maybe was unhidden or was considered to be unclear because that 7th degree and then once again it being in Neptune, so a doubling down of that Neptunian energy, it's going to refer to something that is going to remain unclear or mysterious in some sort of way. So I did want to start out with that by discussing the Chiron. And I do think that this was a really big part of his success that he has had, because he also has a grand trine. Now, Ocean Vuong's natal chart is very interesting to me because, for one, it is comprised of squares. It's mostly comprised of the cardinal variety of the signs, which I'm going to go into in a minute. But because of all this energy that he has that is almost like an opposition or squaring each other, while squares in astrology, specifically natal charts, they're usually going to represent areas where we are most likely going to take an L in those. So, for example, with Ocean's chart, one of the squares that he has that I think is very interesting is that he has his Mars and his Mercury, and those are both squaring his Chiron. So his Mars is in that first degree of Aries, and this is going to refer to somebody who is going to be very adamant about getting their way. This is someone who will be almost like a fighter, someone who could be very competitive, somebody who could be very who could have the potential to be very like loud and aggressive. Mars and Aries, it's going to definitely represent like an athlete. And I did not get that vibe that he was an aggressive person when I met him all those years ago. In fact, he's very soft and gentle, and he talks like this, and he reads his poems, and it's so, romantic. Okay, I'm going to stop. Because it does sound like I'm mocking him, and I'm mocking him. But I mean that like his persona, like it's very, very soft. But with it squaring his Chiron in Cancer, there could be an internal battle in between who he really is, because as I had talked about on Chance the Rapper's natal chart, that your Mars placement, that is who you truly are at your core. Mars is like, keep it real. Like that's exactly who you are. But with that Chiron in Cancer squaring it, it could be that there's a bit of a discrepancy in between who he wants to be and then maybe perhaps what the ancestors want him to be. But back to that, the patterns in the chart. I do realize that I'm kind of going all over the place with this one. But he does have a grand water trine, and trines in charts are considered to be very rare because they're just not really that common. I know that was like a bit of a redundancy, but they are considered to be rare in charts. Grand trines can represent gifts that you have from the ancestors that are going to help propel you forward in this lifetime. However, because they're trines, and trines are known as being the easiest energy to work with within a chart, the downside with trines is that unless you know how to really activate them, it's very easy to just become dependent and lazy upon them because you just expect them to always be available for you. So, for example, if somebody had a grand trine in like fire, this would be somebody who would always be really good with like starting and initiating ideas and communication. Ocean Vuong has a grand trine that's in water because he has his Pluto at that 11th degree of Scorpio, trining with that Chiron in Cancer, as well as trining with his North Node in Pisces. And I think that this does represent why his poetry and his essays are considered to be so innovative and so expressive, is because it's very easy for him to tap into his emotions with this type of trine. Pluto, of course, representing support. Chiron is going to represent exceptions that we have, because while Chiron does deal with things that are artificial, Chiron can also deal with awards. It can deal with places in which we will be exceptional at in our life if they're positively aspected. And then with that North Node in Pisces, which is actually in opposition to his Venus in Virgo, and I'll talk about that in a second. That means that in this particular lifetime, Ocean Vuong is somebody who, in fact, was meant to, I guess you could say, be a poet. I had talked a couple weeks ago about Sylvia Plath and Ted Hughes' natal chart, and how Sylvia Plath had a North Node in Pisces as well. So these are people, the North Node Pisces people. These are people who could come from many past lives where they probably had to work really hard. I know that one interpretation that I've heard for people who have Pisces North Nodes is that they could have been immigrants in this lifetime, or they could have been immigrants in a previous lifetime. And the reason for that is because of that Jupiter influence. They most likely had a very difficult start of their life, because your South Node can represent the early conditions of your life as well, where they probably had to work really, really hard to get stuff because it was not easily handed to them. And in this particular lifetime, what he's supposed to learn is to embrace his spirituality. He's supposed to learn to embrace his compassion and his connectivity. And he is supposed to be somebody who can represent how we are all in fact one, because Pisces, due to that Jupiter as well as that Neptunian influence, it deals with multicultural affairs. It also deals with voyages. So I would say that that's the reason as to why his work is so appreciated among the masses. And it is really good work, because I've had the privilege to read his work. So another interesting aspect that he has in his chart in terms of the lineup that he has a kite, a grand square, as well as a rectangle. So he has that kite. And the thing with kites is that when they get started, it's very easy for them to continue with them. So it's like you get started on one thing and then the next thing is like right around each other. So he does have a kite, once again with that Pluto in Scorpio, Chiron in Cancer, North Node in Pisces, and that Venus in Virgo. And his Venus is in fact attached to his South Node. So something that's interesting is that if we have a planet that's attached to the South Node, it's going to represent something that can feel kind of like empty. Because it might be more difficult for us to access it in this particular lifetime. So because he has his Venus in Virgo, Venus is actually fallen when it's in Virgo. It could represent somebody where, like, when I think about Venus, I think about how when we're deciding on things like major purchases, who's going to be our BFF, who are we crushing on, our value system, all of this is going to be reflected in Venus because it will represent the criteria that we use. And like I said before, Venus is fallen in Virgo because it's going to refer to people who they're always going to be programmed to either be attracted to people who either they can help or people who will help them. And when I look at this kite in particular, I do wonder if, because it does include the North and the South Node, if there is some sort of tension in between what he feels called to do for his ancestors, as opposed to what he wants to do within the present moment. But it is going to represent where he will have a lot of success, where that hard work, that Virgo South Node that he's going to be able to really like tap into, especially because it's attached to Venus, that is going to represent where he gets the payoff and why he has received all the awards and the accolades that he's gotten so far. Next, I want to talk about the grand square that he has with his Neptune and Capricorn. So he's part of that generation of people where a lot of their fantasies were about recognition and fame, that Mercury in Libra. So being very focused in and zeroed in on other people, having a very strong need for an intellectual a conversation and stimulation when it comes to his thought processes. As well as his Chiron in Cancer, once again in that Aries Mars. So grand squares are the rarest pattern that we're going to see in a chart. And they can represent ongoing problems that we may have within our life, because we have all of these like opposing elements that we have. I know that like for Mercury square Neptune, this is actually a very difficult square to work with as far as the cons go. This is going to be a square that is going to represent somebody where they could be very susceptible to lying or being lied to, very susceptible to outside pressure. I believe that the astrologist Rabina, who I have so much respect for, she did an entire live that was dedicated to Mercury square Neptune, and she represented it by spilling water all over documents. Because it's going to represent a thought process that is going to be kind of like watered down and sedated, where it's not always going to be very clear on what the person is talking about or what might be in their conscious mind versus what could be underneath it. That's going to be considered to be one of the negatives of it. It also means that when it comes to like memories that Ocean may have had about being forgotten or being mistreated or being the subject of suffering, it's going to be very easy for him to remember, and that's the reason why he captures it so well in his work. It is also the sign of PR. The gentleman who created PR also had Mercury square Neptune in his chart. So I do think that that's interesting as far as the inspiration that he gets for his creativity. It definitely can come from that Capricorn Neptune as well as that Chiron in Cancer. And then we also have, it's not quite an opposition, I would say it's a contraparallel in between Mercury and Mars. So this could represent how he could be someone who could be very, very gentle in terms of his persona. It's because he may not be able to access that Mars and Aries energy very easily. And last, because this video is getting kind of long, I did want to discuss the rectangle. So rectangles also offer us places of protection where we're going to be very successful at in this particular lifetime. So he has a rectangle with his Venus in Virgo, Chiron in Cancer, Neptune in Capricorn, Neptune in Capricorn and North Node in Pisces. So this could represent how he's been able to achieve so much accolades and success in this particular lifetime, and why he might be somebody that people would be very easy to relate to. He has a lot of terrific energy when it comes to being able to communicate ideas, and that's also because the air element is the most dominant element in his chart. I do realize that for this particular natal chart, I didn't necessarily discuss all of like the conjunctions and the squares and all that other stuff. The melatonin is finally starting to hit, so I can finally go to bed. But I did just want to turn in a very quick video that was about a natal chart that was stored up. So I will put all of the other elements that I have on here, because there's actually a lot in his chart that I did not cover, but like I said before, I wanted to try something different. So please let me know what you think. Have you read any of Ocean Vuong's work? Have you met him in real life? What did he seem like? And let me know if you'd like me to do more natal charts like this. I do realize that I don't have a whole lot of comments, so I do try to read them. And I do want to make sure that they are as easy for people to understand as I can make them. These are very fascinating to me just because I'm so passionate about them, but I also want to make sure that they can be very palatable for other people as well. So this now concludes my natal chart reading of Ocean Vuong. Please give me a thumbs up and subscribe and tune in for the next video.